Immunologist at the Jackson Laboratory, Professor Derya Unutmaz, joins us now from Farmington, Connecticut, to talk more about these very disturbing symptoms, really, to put it lightly. I mean, one could get the feeling that these still not fully understood long-term or secondary symptoms of COVID-19 could actually be worse than the standard illness.
Yes, this is an extremely concerning situation, what you call long COVID, and you described it very well. There's a number of potential reasons why this is happening, partly because of perhaps a chronic lung damage or heart damage or brain damage, an organ damage. Another is disruption of the immune system, metabolism, which resembles another condition that we actually actively study called chronic fatigue syndrome. This is another illness that affects 1 to 2 million people in the U.S., thought to be triggered by some sort of a viral infection. Of course, COVID could make this much, much worse. And there are cases where the symptoms are persisting months after the treatment. There's even cases 6-7 months after COVID infection, and it's only been about 6-7 months since we have the pandemic. So it's conceivable that we're going to continue to see this even longer term. And of course, some of it could be life-threatening as well, not to mention it causes tremendous suffering to the people.
Right. And when we talk about life-threatening, one of the symptoms can actually be deadly strokes. And in the United States, they're seeing younger and younger people suffer from COVID-related strokes. I mean, how do we know how dangerous these are and who's even really at risk?
Yes, these are very dangerous. Actually, we've observed this starting, early in the phase of the pandemic, in March, April periods, where a portion of the patients, it might sound small, but considering the number of cases, 1-2%, in some cases more than that, have these strokes. And these are what we call ischemic strokes, which means that a small thrombus that develops in the blood, which we think either is caused directly by the virus or potentially inflammation of the arterial cells called endothelial cells. And so these small thrombi can go to the lungs and cause pulmonary embolism, which is also life-threatening, can go to heart, can cause heart attacks, or it can go to brain and cause strokes. And the incidence of stroke patients in the COVID, those who had COVID, is tremendously higher. This is also observed in influenza infections at a much smaller rate. So it's not unique to COVID, but what's very concerning about COVID is that the incidence, and also we're seeing this more and more on younger individuals who are younger than 50 years old, who don't really have any potential risk factors to develop these small thrombi that will go and block the blood vessels in the brain, which then causes the stroke.
Right.
And it could be deadly.
Right. Now, what kind of treatment do you think actually needs to be in order? Because we're seeing more and more long COVID patients come out of this. I mean, especially those suffering from, the horrible fatigue. You mentioned chronic fatigue syndrome, those headaches, the exhaustion that sometimes people don't believe. If they don't understand, doctors in particular, that don't understand the complications of COVID, they've never dealt with it before, and they see someone that's, complaining of being tired, and they say, it's stress. You just need to rest. This is more of a psychological issue rather than anything to do with a physical illness.
Absolutely. And, we've been experiencing this with ME/CFS, chronic fatigue syndrome patients for many, many years. It's a extremely neglected disease that we've been studying for the past 6-7 years. And there are millions of people throughout the world where they cannot convince their doctors that they're sick because you don't necessarily find something wrong in the standard testing. But when we look at it in a more in-depth way to the immune system or metabolism or your microbiome in the gut, we see major perturbations, disruptions in these people. So they have a biological disease, which also has neurological symptoms. That's why it's sometimes confused with depression and other issues. But this is really a biological effect of the inflammation to the brain that causes brain fog. And of course, depression and other issues can also arise. But this is a kind of a separate issue than the stroke issue, which is a more relatively more acute issue that should be treated with blood thinners, and it needs to be diagnosed early enough before it starts to cause a stroke. And I think a lot of doctors are aware of this now, and they're one of the consequences of COVID infection is disrupting this blood clotting mechanism. So that's been used. With regards to the chronic fatigue symptoms, we don't really have a cure. We've been working on this for several years because we don't understand exactly why this happens and why in some people it can persist for years, for decades. Right. That's a real concern.
Awareness really is part of the solution, though. Doctors need to be better informed about what the complications can be all around the world. Okay, Derya Unutmaz, thank you so much for joining us. Highly informative. We really appreciate it.